Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to 52 Weeks of Leadership. My name is Molly Anderson, Executive Director of UB Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness, and I'd like to welcome you to today's installment of 52 Weeks of Leadership featuring Teresa Miller. Teresa is Senior Vice Chancellor of SUNY Strategic Initiatives and Chief Diversity Officer. She's no stranger to us. She was a longtime faculty member in the UB Law School where she was a professor of law. So welcome back to Buffalo, Terry, virtually. She has 20 years specializing in immigration law, criminal procedure, prisoner law, and she's also a graduate of Harvard Law School. Today's topic is going to be courageous leadership in the face of diversity, equity, inclusion challenges. Before I turn it over to Terry, I just want to thank our sponsor, Geico, who've made this possible. Thank everyone who's been following our series week in and week out. And remind you that we are going to be hosting a conference on June 3rd featuring Daniel Pink on the future of leadership, changing the way we live and work. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Terry to get us started.
Thank you. And thank you, Molly, and thank you to the Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness for having me speak with you today. Today, I want to talk to you about leaning into diversity, equity, inclusion, and leading in that space. So as Molly mentioned, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer as well as a Senior Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives at SUNY System Administration. So I lead in the DE&I space, or diversity, equity, inclusion space, every day, right? I advise the SUNY Chancellor on emerging diversity, equity, inclusion issues, and I set the priorities and strategies for DE&I across SUNY's 64 campuses. It's a job I love doing. It's a job that comes with challenges every single day, and it is never dull. That's for sure. And you don't have to be a chief diversity officer to lead in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, right? You just need to be courageous in your leadership and understand diversity, equity, inclusion as critical aspects of business leadership. So why is diversity, equity, inclusion critical to business leadership? Well, for several reasons. One, and a very simple one, is it impacts your bottom line, right? A 2014 study by the Boston Consulting Group has found that increasing the diversity of leadership teams leads to more and better innovation and improved financial performance, right? This study looked at 1,700 different companies across 8 different countries with varying industries and company sizes. And they found that companies that have more diverse management have 19% higher revenue due to innovation. It shows that diversity is not just a metric to be strived for, it's actually an integral part of a successful revenue generating business. Also, Morgan Stanley released some data in a 2016 study that showed that companies with higher levels of gender diversity have lower volatility and better return on equity than companies ranked low in diversity. So as just a matter of corporate bottom line, diversity, equity, inclusion is important. It also promotes productivity. So as I always quote a political economist from the University of Michigan, Scott Page, diverse teams solve complex problems faster and better, right? So there's decades of research by organizational scientists, psychologists, sociologists, economists, and demographers that show that socially diverse groups, that is groups with a diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, are more innovative than homogeneous groups, right? You're not in an echo chamber, right? But you are you're trying to solve problems where people bring their unique experiences, their unique life experiences to bear on a problem. And another reason why DE&I is critical to business leadership is that it promotes fairness and equity. Right, and that's very important. That's sort of the social justice reason for ensuring that there's diversity, equity, inclusion. But here's the catch. Just making your company more diverse in terms of race and gender doesn't automatically increase productivity, right? So it is the inclusion piece of diversity, equity, inclusion that activates the power of diversity. And I'll give you an example, right? Imagine you have an all-white male leadership team and you add one woman and one person of color to that team. Well, without inclusion, right, without making sure that those new team members feel welcome, respected, like they're a part of the conversation, you just end up with people that are kind of pissed off, right? I mean, they're kind of, pouting and grumpy, and and the people that are in the room are like, why aren't you adding? It's it's the inclusion piece, right? Making sure that in a diverse team, though all people feel welcome and respected, their views are respected, right? That's what powers, that's the inclusion that powers diversity. Now, I want to switch gears for a minute and just talk briefly about a topic that, because much is happening in the world right now, and a topic that's been on many people's minds is this notion of systemic racism or structural racism. What is it, right? And I just want to be clear, because I think every business leader today must understand what structural racism is. If not, you're going to be working from well behind, right, from behind the eight ball. So structural racism, right, or systemic racism, they're fairly interchangeable. It's a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms work in various and often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequality, right, that produced outcomes that chronically favor or put a particular racial group at a disadvantage, right? So I know that's a lot to unpack, but we're talking about policies, practices, even think about cultural representations in films, right? Where certain groups get to play the hero, certain groups get to play the president, certain members of certain groups get to be the titans of business, and others are in supporting roles, right? Or they're playing the workers, or the the less impactful cast members. So systemic racism is important because what is important to know about it is we're moving away, right, from this notion of individualized racism, right, racial animus. In other words, it's the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist, right? So you've heard this term anti-racist. What it means is it's not just, well, I'm not a racist, so everything's cool. It's like, it's that anti-racism means that you are affirmatively working toward making the system fair for everyone, right? So it's anti-racism is about addressing structural racism. Notice the other part of that definition had to do with producing outcomes that chronically favor a particular group, right? And that's very important because systemic racism looks at systems, right? It looks at outcomes over, like, for instance, at SUNY, we look at who are students that are graduating on time. Are there gaps between in racial groups between the students that are graduating on time and the students that are taking longer to graduate, right? It doesn't look at, is there an individual, of course we're concerned about individual racism, but the structural analysis looks at outcomes over, broad societal outcomes. So I'll give you some examples of these. School disciplinary policies in which students of color are punished at a higher rate than their white counterparts. You've heard a lot about the racial disproportion in COVID outcomes, right? Disproportionately higher rates of COVID-19 infection, hospitalization, and death among Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American people compared to white people. Criminal justice policies that disproportionately surveil, arrest, and incarcerate African Americans, and even wealth accumulation, right, and housing issues that were impeded by, housing equity that was impeded by redlining. So what does this all have to do with courageous leadership? Well, I think the killing of George Floyd, right, when he was being arrested in Minneapolis on May 25th of last year, it sparked a national debate about systemic racism, right? It harkened back to the killings of people like Emmett Till many, many years ago, and I think really shocked people I mean, the visceral being, the fact that it was recorded, the fact that so many people saw it, and the fact that that due to like social media, his suffocating to death was seen all over the world, right, in real time. I mean, we're now in the midst of a trial, right, of the officer Derek Chauvin, who killed Floyd, and the verdict is likely to spark real protest, regardless of the verdict. And if the verdict is acquittal, there's one type of protest. If it's conviction, there's another group that's going to be very upset. There are people that feel like the election was stolen, and they feel like that this is another example of racial inequity toward them, right? Another thing that's happening that I think we really need to be aware of, and that requires some courageous leadership, is hate crimes against Asians, right? They've been on the rise. And in 16 of America's largest cities, anti-Asian hate crimes have increased 145% just in last year, in the year 2020, with the first spike that occurring in March and April amidst a rise in COVID cases and negative stereotypes of Asians relating to the pandemic, right? This rise occurred even though it was the rise in hate crimes against Asians occurred even though hate crimes against other groups were going down, right? So in 18 of America's major cities, including the 16 largest ones, hate crimes overall last year declined by 6%, but were up toward Asians 145%, right? So in these racially tense times, I think courageous leadership looks like this. I think it means affirmatively acknowledging the stress that colleagues of color are experiencing with disproportionate COVID-19 impacts, or the rise in hate crimes targeting Asians, with the killing of George Floyd. It means affirmatively acknowledging that stress and expressing empathy. I think courageous leadership looks like finding ways that your business can identify structural racism and lean into racial equity. So, for instance, SUNY recently did a review of, and I talked earlier about its graduation rates, but it turns out we looked at racial equity across a broad number of factors. We looked at earnings, post-college earnings of our students. We looked at persistence rates, right? Which students were more like, were there gaps? Were there differences among racial groups and students more likely to drop out? We looked at even how students, whether they felt like they were included on the campus, if they felt comfortable being on a campus. We have some campuses that the population of our campuses looks very different than the populations of the surrounding communities, right? So we looked to try to figure out where there's structural inequity, and how we could then address it. And one of the ways that we're addressing it is through our EOP program, in which economically disadvantaged students of color actually outperform the average SUNY student in terms of on-time completion, degree completion. So again, what tools can we use? We're identifying tools that we can use to address racial inequity. Another way to lead courageously is to commit your business to identifying structural racism and leaning into racial equity. So between the day George Floyd was killed, May 25th of last year, to October 2020 of last year, about 1/3 of Fortune 1000 companies made a public statement on racial equity, right? Saying that this is important. Living in a society that's equitable is important. It's important to our business. It's important to our clients. Of those Fortune 1000 companies, 93% followed their public statement with an internal or external commitment. And 57% publicly announced the amount that they were committing to racial equity initiatives, pledging a total of $66 billion. And I think JP Morgan actually pledged about 35 billion, huge amounts of money. And more than 3/5 of the external financial commitments were explicitly to extend over multiple years, right? So not a one and done. That usually doesn't work too well. It's been a long time. These problems have been a long time in coming. They're not going to go away with a quick one and done strategy. Another thing that I think courageous leadership looks like is initiating discussions with your leadership teams about how your business can be more involved in promoting racial equity. And this is what SUNY's doing. It just recently announced a 25-point action plan to increase diversity, equity, inclusion. And it includes many things. There are recommendations on closing student academic equity gaps. There are recommendations on creating a more inclusive culture at SUNY, including creating a model diversity training program for our campuses and doing a biennial campus climate survey to actually know, rather than to just guess and use anecdotal evidence, but to actually know what our climates are like for our students, our faculty, and our staff. And do they vary by racial group in terms of the perceptions of safety, the perceptions of welcome? We're also expanding programs that are going to close persistent equity gaps. And we're also looking at things like, we educate a lot of people who pursue degrees in criminal justice. When they come out of a SUNY criminal justice program, do they understand the history of race within criminal justice, right? Do they understand, that our one of our goals is to make sure that we turn out culturally competent police officers, right, and park rangers and people who are going to be carrying guns and defending our communities and protecting and serving them. SUNY has also initiated a town gown initiative with vendors in the communities surrounding our campuses, because there are many places, like our students talk about being followed, right, when they go into a store, being, people looking to make sure they're not stealing things, and it's mostly students of color. We want to really, we're starting an initiative where businesses pledge, they adopt a pledge that says we adopt SUNY's values of inclusion, and diversity and equity, and your students can expect to be treated fairly and be treated, and welcome in our establishment, right? So it's a matter of working with vendors and then we sort of get to have a little a window cling outside the business that says, this is a SUNY inclusive space. In other words, here's a space that you don't have to worry that you're going to be treated poorly just because you look different from the people in our community. A couple of other suggestions about courageous leadership. Create forums for employees to discuss race, gender, and culture in a manner that promotes understanding across differences. And that could be having a guest speaker, having movie groups or book groups where you're discussing movies or groups that movies or books that deal with race. And the last thing I want to suggest is that courageous leadership looks like being attuned to clues about the inclusiveness or lack thereof in your workplace and responding appropriately. And I'm going to end by sharing a experience when I was the Chief Diversity Officer and Vice Provost for Inclusive Excellence at UB. One of the things, we had an incident where an art student went a little rogue in her art assignment and posted Black only and white only sort of segregation era signs at the bathrooms and the water fountains in some of the buildings on campus. Now I'm looking at this going, okay, so what history student, what's going on here? I'm seeing it in one way, right? Because of my experiences, my profession, my age, whatever. But our students experienced it differently. and I only realized the impact that those signs had when the students started calling home to their parents, the Black students. They had a meeting that evening. They were in tears, right? Some of them calling home, should I come home? Now, at first glance, you could say, well, that's just an unreasonable response, right? It's just some signs, right? But I think being courageous in leadership means being attuned to clues, right? The fact that students felt that strongly that they were calling home to say, should I come home? I'm scared, meant to me that overall there was a problem with inclusion, right? Those students that for something that I won't say minor, but that odd, right? To strike a response that's so intense, right? Told me something's going on that's very different than we're perceiving, and we need to jump on it. So I think it's really important in those. I mean, I learned a valuable lesson because I learned that my reaction, was not the same as the students' reaction. The fact that they reacted so strongly meant they didn't feel secure enough to just brush it off, right? Oh, this is just some art student or some history student or whatever. It's a joke, right? They didn't feel it was a joke. So to me, that was a clue that there's a lot more going on. They're feeling a lot less included than we ever suspected. And so we acted appropriately and addressed the issue. But I think I want to end by just saying these are very difficult times. I mean, between COVID, rising anti-Asian hate, George Floyd's killing and Derek Chauvin's trial. We're under stress every day. The people who you work with, your colleagues and your employees, are under stress every day. And I think courage is about not hoping that everything will be okay, but acknowledging that there is a problem, right? Acknowledging that we have issues in this country that we're trying to solve, and leaning into them, and being the one that initiates the conversation, being the one that checks in with someone, even at the risk of someone saying, oh, no, I'm fine. But that is important, that kind of what I call radical empathy. So with that, I want to take your questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. We're so grateful to have you here. I'm going to give people an opportunity to add their questions to the chat. And first ask you, can you talk a little bit about the role of an ally and how we can be better allies for diversity?
So, I think that the key to being a good ally is to be informed, right? And to understand that folks that, like, for instance, I consider myself an ally to my Asian American colleagues who, so I made a phone call and I said to one of the people on my team who's an Asian American woman, is your family experiencing tell me, if it was, is there anything that we can do to help, right? What are you experiencing? And she was, so this is in the Albany area, and she said, we're okay. We haven't really, experienced anything crazy, but, she said, I'm a little, I'm hearing about it and I'm a little nervous. And just being, so I think it's being willing to reach out. It's being informed, right? So that you're not just ignoring something that's happening in a colleague's life. And that sort of radical empathy, just saying, what can I do to help? I think it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you. We have a question from Ron. He said the head case for diversity and inclusion has been made, but more action can be driven when the heart case is made. What can leaders do to drive the emotional or heart connection?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's so important to hear people's stories. I think and I've seen some great campaigns where people, where companies have encouraged their employees to be authentic in the workplace. In other words, if you have a same-sex partner and you have to always, feel like you have to keep your picture of your partner and your family in your top desk drawer, while everybody else has theirs out, right? You don't feel included, right? So I think the heart case is really to allow people to tell their stories and to honor, right, that. In other words, to say it's important for us for everyone in our workplace to feel authentic and to be authentic. I mean, I think that helps a lot. Yeah, I've got some other ideas, but I think that's important.
Thank you. Rick asks, how can we do a better job communicating to organizations of all types that those are more diverse and inclusive are, per research studies, indeed more effective? The assumption being that all organizations would like to be more effective.
So this is the head case, right? We're back from the heart to back to the head. Like, how do we, yeah, I think the question is how to communicate that better. And I would just say, you know, part of it is people don't know the research, and there's so much of it that so there's something that a colleague of mine who's the vice provost for faculty affairs, Bob Granfield, studies. It's called social norming, where you put out statements where, you know, that are statements of norms, right? X% of companies are experience heightened productivity, or X% of greater productivity when, you know, but I think getting the message out means people have to be made aware of it. And then these aren't surveys that people are going to necessarily come across in their, you know, in their casual reading. I think everything happens from the leadership level. I've been and having been on leadership teams now, this will be like about my 8th year on a leadership team, either at campus or at the system level. Everything flows from if leadership doesn't say that it's important, right? If your leaders, if your organization's leaders don't acknowledge its importance, then it's not going to resonate. So I would say, you know, it's really important for leadership to communicate.
Thank you. Sujata asks, is there research showing whether DI efforts can help with recruiting efforts? We usually think of recruiting leading to better diversity and inclusion, but does it work in reverse?
Molly, repeat that, please, just so I make sure I understand the question.
Sure. Is there research showing whether DI efforts can help with recruiting efforts? We usually think of recruiting leading to better diversity and inclusion, but does it work in reverse?
Right. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how we recruit faculty, because we have a multi-million-dollar faculty diversity initiative. And one of the things that I've learned is who your candidates see when they interview, you know, determines how excited they are to come. Who is in the unit that they will be joining, the department they will be joining, determines a lot of whether they're excited to come. So I would say, you know, absolutely, if the more diversity you have in your recruiting process, the more likely the more successful you will be at recruiting diverse candidates. And at UB, I used to have I give a presentation to faculty leadership and faculty search committees. And I have this picture, a black and white picture from like the 50s. And they're all white men sitting around a desk. And I said, okay, what's missing from here? Like, if you're a candidate, right, who's interviewing, what are you seeing here? And it's, you know, you want to have people who are excited about diversity and inclusion. You want to have people who represent the diversity of your organization at the table, at those recruiting places. I think it will, you know, it helps tremendously in landing people.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. For anyone who may have joined us late or may have missed this opportunity to hear Terry, you can look on our website where we have recordings of past episodes and catch the whole program. And I know I, for one, am going to go back and listen again. So thank you once again, Terry Miller, Senior Vice Chancellor of Strategic Initiatives and Chief Diversity Officer for SUNY. Please join us next week for Dr. Jim Lemoyne. He's going to be talking about ethics, leadership, and other deceptively complicated things. So you don't want to miss that. Thank you so much, Terry. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Molly.
Molly, we